Please, Your Honor, please. I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong. Please, let me just pay the fine. Please, I'm begging you.
You see them all the time. The ones who glide into my courtroom like they're walking onto a red carpet, convinced that the zeros in their bank account make them bulletproof. They look at the law not as a set of rules, but as an inconvenience meant only for people who can't afford a $500 an hour attorney. I've been doing this a long time, and if there is one thing I cannot stomach, it's raw, unfiltered entitlement. I took my seat that Tuesday morning, adjusted my glasses, and looked at the docket. The air in the room was already thick, with the kind of arrogance that only comes from generational wealth. On my left stood David Miller, 68 years old, a retired Navy veteran who had spent his entire pension buying a small, refrigerated truck to run a local florist delivery service. His suit was dated, the lapels a little frayed, but it was impeccably pressed. His hands were rough, the hands of a man who had worked every single day of his life to build something honest. On his face, I saw the quiet exhaustion of someone who was watching his livelihood slip away. On my right lounged the defendant, Preston Sterling, 24 years old and the youngest son of Arthur Sterling, a notorious real estate tycoon who owned half the commercial blocks in the city. Preston was leaning back in his chair, checking his reflection in the dark screen of his smartphone, wearing a bespoke Italian suit and a smirk that made my blood pressure instantly spike. His lawyer, a nervous-looking man carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than David's entire truck, kept trying to whisper urgently in his ear. Preston just waved him off, chuckling to himself as if he were waiting for a comedy show to begin. I picked up my gavel and brought it down hard on the sounding block. The sharp crack echoed through the high ceilings, cutting through Preston's laughter instantly. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice dropping to that dead calm tone that usually makes people start sweating. "Put the phone away. Now. You are not lounging at your father's country club, and I am not one of his employees. You are in a court of law, and you will sit up straight and pay attention, or I will have the bailiff escort you to a holding cell where the lighting is significantly less flattering." Preston blinked, his perfectly groomed eyebrows shooting up. He was clearly unused to hearing the word no. He slipped the phone into his jacket pocket, but the arrogant, mocking smile didn't entirely fade from his lips. "Yes, Your Honor," he drawled, his tone dripping with fake compliance. "I'm just eager to get this little misunderstanding cleared up. My time is rather valuable." "Your time," I replied, staring a hole right through him, "is currently mine. And we are going to spend it discussing how you managed to total a 68-year-old veteran's delivery truck with your Porsche while allegedly live streaming yourself doing 90 in a residential zone." I turned my attention to the plaintiff. "Mr. Miller, you may begin. Tell me exactly what happened." As David stepped up to the microphone, his hands shaking slightly, Preston sighed loudly and rolled his eyes. He thought this was a game. He thought his daddy's money had already bought his way out. He was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. "Mr. Miller?" I said, my tone softening just enough to let the man know he was in a safe space to speak his truth. "Take your time." David cleared his throat, his grip tightening on the edges of the podium. He detailed the events of that Tuesday afternoon with the precision of a military man. He had been stopped at a red light on Elm Street, making his final floral delivery for a local wedding. The next thing he knew, there was a deafening screech of tires, a horrific crunch of metal, and his livelihood was flipped onto its side. His delivery van, a vehicle he had poured 10 years of savings into, was totaled. "Your Honor," David said, his voice cracking slightly, "I don't have a trust fund. I have a pension and that truck. That truck was how I paid for my wife's medical bills. Since the accident, I've lost 3 major contracts. I can't deliver." I looked at the photos entered into evidence. The twisted, shattered remains of a once pristine refrigerated van. Then I looked at the defendant. Preston was picking at his cuticles. "Are we boring you, Mr. Sterling?" I snapped, causing his highly paid lawyer to flinch. Preston looked up, feigning innocence. "Not at all, Your Honor. It's just a tragic sob story, really. But accidents happen. That's why we have insurance. My father's people reached out to him. We offered him $50,000 to go away quietly. That's more than that rust bucket was worth." I felt the familiar heat of righteous anger flare in my chest. "To go away quietly?" I repeated, leaning over the bench. "This man is not a stray dog begging for scraps at your back door, Mr. Sterling. He is a United States veteran who was sitting at a red light when you slammed a $200,000 sports car into him." "Well, he shouldn't have been in the fast lane," Preston muttered, crossing his arms. "He was at a stoplight. I fired back, my voice booming through the microphone, and according to the police report, you weren't even looking at the road, you were looking at your phone. In fact, Plaintiff's Exhibit A is a video you posted to your own social media accounts 3 seconds before the impact. Care to explain that? Preston's lawyer stood up, sweating bullets. Your Honor, we object to the characterization of "Sit down, counsel, before I hold you in contempt," I warned. Your client is going to answer the question. Preston scoffed, leaning into the mic. I was interacting with my followers. It's called building a brand. Something people like him, he gestured dismissively toward David, wouldn't understand. I told him I'd write a check. He's just greedy. He opened his mouth. But your father isn't here. You are. And you just learned that in my courtroom, Daddy's money doesn't buy special treatment. It buys you a lesson. Kyle's face turned beet red. His hands shook as he clutched the table. The ego destruction was beautiful, raw, immediate. This wasn't just losing a case. This was a public stripping of the illusion that he was untouchable. I leaned in closer. Let me give you some free advice, Kyle. Since your parents clearly never did. Get a real job. Learn what it means to earn something. Stop hiding behind your bank account. Because one day, that money won't be there to save you, and you'll be left with nothing but the worthless person you've become. The gavel came down, case closed. Bailiff, escort Mr. Harrington out if he can't compose himself. As he stood up, legs wobbly, the reality hit him. No phone call to Daddy was fixing this. No check was erasing the humiliation. The entire courtroom watched a billionaire's son realize, for perhaps the first time, that he was small. I sat back in my chair as the room emptied, a small smile on my face. Another day, another entitled fool who thought he could play the system. But this one? This one would sting for a long time. I watched him stumble out, that once cocky stride reduced to a pathetic shuffle. The bailiff didn't even need to touch him. Kyle Harrington looked like a man who'd just been hit by his own Lamborghini. Good. Let the humiliation sink in deep. I've seen $1,000 suits before, but few wear shame as poorly as this one did. The courtroom stayed silent for a beat longer than usual. Elena Vargas sat there, tears in her eyes, but not the broken kind. These were the tears of someone who finally saw justice show up on time. I turned to her directly. Miss Vargas, you did the right thing by not backing down. Too many people let boys like him steamroll them because of the last name. You didn't. That's why you won today. She nodded, voice cracking. Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted what was fair. Fair is exactly what you got, I shot back, and a little extra for the bribe attempt. That wasn't just stupid, it was criminal-level arrogance. If I weren't feeling generous, I'd have held him in contempt and let the district attorney deal with the rest. Her lawyer shook my hand. The gallery murmured. But I wasn't done processing this clown. As the room cleared, my mind went back to the exact moment he tried to buy me. The sheer audacity. People think money whispers. In my courtroom, money screams incompetence. I called a short recess after the verdict, but my mind wouldn't rest. I stepped into my chambers, poured a glass of water, and stared at the wall lined with the plaques and honors I've earned the hard way. Not bought, earned. That's the difference these silver spoon kids never understand. 30 minutes later, we resumed for the formal entry of judgment. Kyle was back, but the fight was gone. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Mr. Sterling, I said, leaning forward, voice sharp as ever, before I sign this order, is there anything you'd like to say that doesn't involve offering me cash under the table? He swallowed hard, looking everywhere but at me. Your Honor, I apologize. I was out of line. Out of line? I laughed once, a dry, cutting sound that echoed in the quiet room. Sweetheart, you weren't out of line. You were in another zip code. You thought because Daddy made billions flipping commercial real estate that the world owes you a free pass? Let me educate you on something real quick. I've had defendants offer me everything from sexual favors to vacation homes. None of them walked out winners. You know why? Because I don't need your money. I don't need your daddy's influence. What I need, what this system needs, is people like you learning that actions have consequences. He tried one last pathetic attempt, his voice barely a squeak. My father will want to appeal. Appeal all you want, I snapped, pointing a pen at him like a weapon. The transcript is crystal clear. You offered a bribe on the record. Any appellate judge with half a brain will laugh you out of the building. And if your father wants to throw good money after bad, that's his choice. But you're going to pay this judgment every cent. And if I hear one whisper that you or your family are harassing Mr. Miller afterward, I will personally make sure the next courtroom you see has bars on the windows. The tension peaked right there. Kyle's face went from red to pale. His hands gripped the table so tight, his knuckles turned white. I could see the exact second his ego shattered completely, the moment he realized no amount of wire transfers or private jets could undo the public dressing down he had just received. I continued, driving the point home like a hammer. You know what the real tragedy is? You had every advantage. Private schools, Ivy League probably, connections most people only dream about. And what did you do with it? You drove like an idiot, hurt an innocent man trying to earn a living, and then tried to bribe a judge. That's not just entitled, that's weak. Real men own their mistakes. You tried to purchase your way out of being a man. David wiped his eyes, sitting a little taller in his chair. A few spectators in the gallery actually clapped lightly before I silenced them with a look. I don't run a circus, but I'll admit this one felt satisfying. Judgment is entered as stated, I declared, signing the order with a flourish. Mr. Sterling, you have 30 days. Don't test me on that deadline. I've got a long memory and zero tolerance for rich boys who think they're above it all. He stood up slowly, defeated, the bespoke suit suddenly looking like a costume he had outgrown. As he walked past David, he couldn't even look the older man in the eye. That's when I knew the lesson had landed. Not just the money his father would probably cover the financial loss without blinking, but the ego blow. The kind of blow that stays with you long after the Porsches and the VIP parties lose their shine. I banged the gavel one final time. Court is adjourned. Later that afternoon, as I reviewed the day's docket in the quiet of my chambers, a small part of me wondered if Preston would actually learn anything from this. Probably not right away. Boys like him usually need a few more crashes, literal and figurative, before reality truly sinks in. But today, in my courtroom, I made sure one billionaire son felt exactly what it's like when the system doesn't bend to the weight of a wallet. The public would undoubtedly hear about this. These cases always leak, especially when there's a famous name attached. The headlines would scream, "Billionaire heir attempts to bribe Judge Judy gets destroyed." Let them print it. Maybe some other entitled brat watching the evening news tonight will think twice before trying the same garbage in a court of law. I stood up, stretched my back, and allowed myself one small, satisfied smile. Another day of reminding the world that justice isn't a commodity you can pick up at a luxury dealership. Not in my house. Never in my house. The sun was setting outside the heavy windows as I gathered my things. David Miller had already left with his modest victory, no doubt relieved that the nightmare was nearing an end. Preston? He was probably sitting in the back of a black SUV right now, frantically texting his father. Let him text. Some lessons cost more than money. This one had cost him his illusion of absolute invincibility. I stepped out of the courthouse that evening with the kind of satisfaction that only comes from watching pure entitlement get body slammed by reality. The media was already camped outside, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Judge Judy, did he really try to bribe you? Is this going to be appealed? I didn't stop for them. I never do. But I allowed myself one sharp comment over my shoulder. That young man learned today that his father's billions don't come with a get-out-of-consequences card. Next time, maybe he'll watch where he's driving and who he's trying to buy. The drive home was quiet, but my mind was loud. I kept replaying Preston Sterling's face the moment the punitive damages hit. That perfect jawline had gone slack. Those designer shoulders had slumped like a cheap suit in the rain. Good. Ego destruction isn't listed in the court rules, but it's one of the best parts of this job. Later that night, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, scrolling through the news on my tablet. The story had already exploded. Billionaire son attempts to buy Judge Judy in court, gets verdict that destroyed his ego. Headlines everywhere. Social media was on fire. People were posting clips of the moment I shut him down. One viral video had over 2 million views in 3 hours. Comments ranged from "Queen Judy strikes again" to "finally someone tells these rich kids no." I allowed myself a small chuckle. They think it's entertainment. For me, it's Tuesday. But the story wasn't over. 2 days later, I received a motion from Preston's legal team requesting a stay on the judgment. I called an emergency hearing. Of course I did. I wasn't about to let this spoiled brat drag his feet. He showed up looking worse. Eyes bloodshot. Suit still expensive, but now wrinkled, like he hadn't slept. His father, the famous Arthur Sterling, wasn't there in person. Just another high-priced lawyer trying to spin gold out of garbage. Your Honor, the new lawyer began smoothly. My client was under extreme duress during the previous proceeding. The offer he made was misinterpreted. I cut him off before he could finish the sentence. Misinterpreted? Son, I've been on the bench longer than you've been alive. When someone says, name your number to a judge, that's not duress talking. That's desperation and arrogance having a baby. Sit down. Kyle wouldn't even look at me. His head was down, staring at the polished mahogany table like it owed him money. I leaned forward, my voice low and lethal, making sure every syllable landed with the weight it deserved. Mr. Sterling, you had 2 full days to think about what you did in this room. 2 days to reflect on the fact that you nearly turned a straightforward civil suit over a car accident into a federal bribery case. And instead of walking back in here with humility and a checkbook, your team is trying to weasel out of paying? Let me tell you exactly what is going to happen. I tapped the bench with my pen for emphasis. The judgment stands, full amount, today. If I do not see proof of a confirmed wire transfer by the close of business, I will issue a bench warrant. And trust me when I say, I will thoroughly enjoy watching the United States Marshals drag you back in here in handcuffs. Your daddy can afford the best lawyers on the Eastern Seaboard, but he cannot buy me, and he cannot buy time. The tension in the room ratcheted up so fast it felt like the air pressure had dropped. David wasn't there this time, but his presence lingered in the courtroom, anchored by the photos of his destroyed truck, still sitting on the clerk's desk. Kyle finally lifted his head. His eyes were filled with something entirely new, pure, unadulterated hatred mixed with the raw panic of a cornered animal. Perfect. Let him hate me. Hate builds character when it's aimed at the truth. You think this makes you powerful? He muttered under his breath, barely audible. I heard it. Of course I heard it. Powerful? I repeated loudly, ensuring the court reporter caught every word. Boy, I don't need power. I have authority. There's a distinct difference. Power is what your father buys with stock options and campaign contributions. Authority is what I earned by sitting on this bench and never selling out. You tried to purchase the one thing in this world that still has integrity, and you failed spectacularly. That's not just a loss in a court case. That's a loss in life. His new lawyer tried one last Hail Mary pass. Your Honor, we're prepared to settle for the original damages right now, without the punitives. Denied, I snapped, not missing a beat. You don't get to negotiate the rules after attempting to bribe the referee. The punitive damages stay, because your client needs to feel this. He needs to remember the sting of this humiliation every single time he looks at his bank account. Maybe then, he'll finally grow up. I signed the enforcement order right there in open court, pressing the pen hard into the paper. Payment due by 5 p.m. Not 5/1, not next week. Today. Kyle stood up so fast his heavy chair scraped loudly against the floor. For a split second, I thought he might say something stupid again. Instead, he just glared. Then he turned on his heel and walked out, his shoulders rigid with the kind of impotent rage only the truly privileged feel when they finally hit a wall they cannot buy their way over. That afternoon, the wire transfer hit the court's escrow account at 4:47 p.m., every single cent. I had the clerk confirm the routing number and the funds twice before I allowed myself to fully exhale. Then, I picked up the phone and called David Miller personally, something I rarely do. Mr. Miller, I said, leaning back in my chair. It's done. The funds are secure. You can start shopping for a new truck and rebuild your business. And listen to me carefully. If that boy or anyone from the Sterling family contacts you, you call my chambers directly. Understood? He cried. This proud, stoic veteran who had kept his composure through the entire ordeal finally broke down. It was a quiet, dignified sound of pure relief. I don't know how to thank you, Judge, he rasped. Don't thank me, I told him gently. Thank the system that still works when good people refuse to back down. And next time a kid in a fancy sports car hits you, don't hesitate. Come straight to me. I hung up the receiver and allowed myself another quiet moment of victory. This wasn't just about the financial compensation. It was about the message sent loud and clear across every tabloid and legal blog in the state. No one is above the law in my courtroom. Not billionaires. Not their entitled children. Not anyone. Weeks later, I heard through the legal grapevine that Preston Sterling had been quietly removed from several public-facing roles in his father's vast real estate empire. The board of directors, it seemed, didn't appreciate the negative press that came with an heir who attempted to bribe a sitting judge on the public record. Daddy's money couldn't shield him from the one thing he feared most: public embarrassment and a loss of status. I smiled when I heard that, not because I enjoy ruining lives, but because I enjoy correcting them. Some people only learn when the fall actually hurts. Preston Sterling fell hard that day, and the bruise on his massive ego would last far longer than any dent in David's old delivery van. Another case closed. Another reminder that in my world, justice isn't blind to privilege. It actively seeks it out and strips it bare. It sees straight through the designer clothes, the private jets, and the carefully crafted public images. It sees the scared, arrogant little boy underneath who never learned the word no, and I'm more than happy to teach it to him.